Winter Storm Commission members are closer to releasing a report outlining what went wrong during the ice storm in January.
The first draft of the report was discussed today. Hunter Hoagland is in studio. Hunter, with the findings of that.
Yeah, the first draft applauds Metro leaders and also NES for stepping up to mitigate that crisis. However, though, several commissioners agreed there is no sugarcoating it when it comes to what went wrong. So here's some of the things we found out today from that report. Commission members say the biggest issues stem from a lack of coordination. The Office of Emergency Management, NES, and the mayor's office were sometimes just not on the same page, so the public then wasn't fully aware of the severity of the storm. Also, OEM decided to operate virtually during the first couple of days of that winter storm. The report also targets NES, which had to call in linemen from other states. NES only has about 250 linemen of their own, and at the peak of this storm, they had 1,700 people out working to get those lights back on. Commissioners say NES has to be better about communicating in the moment, not after something goes wrong.
The Super Bowl is coming in 2030. And if we are not prepared to meet the challenges of mass issues or mass challenges related to public safety, then we could put ourselves at a strategic disadvantage. And so
I want to make sure that our Metro employees and NES employees do feel seen and appreciated. But I think there is a tension here between kind of individual commendation, right? People who had to step up and do extraordinary things in extraordinary times for lack of systems and process.
So another thing here, commissioners want the mayor to start an outside review of the storm response now before the next budget cycle begins. In the meantime, though, they will spend the next couple of months gathering more data before that final report is due.